Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. It's a pleasure to have all of you with us. So my name is Alain Dupeyrat. I'm the head of Regional Development and Tourism Division. So we are within the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities, and we are all working to support the work of the Regional Development Policy Committee, and more particularly today, the Working Party on Rural Policy. And welcome to the chair of the Working Party, also Peter. And so today we are here to launch, I'm not sure it appears, but a famous publication, which is the Rural Wellbeing Geography of Opportunities. So welcome to all of you. I think we have about 350 attendees. Not everybody is yet around, but I see that the figures are augmenting on a second by second basis. So we have a few, we have about 1 hour together. We can take 5-10 more minutes if we need at the end, you know, also to allow some questions. So we'll have the minister from Chile. We'll have a number of speakers, but I will introduce you a bit later. One thing I would like to mention before we start is that we have a question and answer chat. So all the attendees are invited to make their questions on this chat. They can address the question to the OECD, and the OECD Secretariat will respond to you immediately, but you can also direct your question to some of our speakers, and I will convey the question to our presenter. And then after the presentation, everyone will have a chance to respond to you. Of course, we will have to manage all of this in the time available. So without further ado, I would like first to introduce Lamia Kamal-Shawi. She's the director of the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities. And in this capacity, she oversees work on regional development, rural, urban policies, also all the work we are doing at the OECD on small and medium-sized enterprises, of the work on tourism, also the work on local employment at the local level with a lead committee. So Lamia, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Great, thank you so much, Alain. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this meeting. I'd like to start by warmly welcoming Mr. Antonio Walker, Minister of Agriculture of Chile. Minister, your country has been a true champion in advancing its national rural policy framework. So I'm really delighted to hear you today and to hear how we can learn from your country. Thanks for your presence, Minister. Of course, we are really honored to have you with us. I would like also to extend a special thanks to our participants and distinguished guests for joining us today, and in particular to our chair of the OECD Working Party on Rural Policy, Mr. Peter Vosner. So the purpose of today's event is to launch the publication Rural Wellbeing Geography of Opportunities, which is the latest iteration of the OECD Rural Development Policy Framework. And Alain, please try to get this cover on the screen, maybe through a specific slide later, so that people can see the cover, maybe through a slide.
Yeah.
So for more than 40 years, the OECD has been working on providing an evidence-based policy framework to guide governments in the development of rural regions. This framework has continued to evolve over the decades, keeping pace with changing times and reflecting the organization's latest thinking in the area. This publication could not be timelier. Rural regions have been facing strong demographic pressures with lower growth rates and higher shares of aging over the last decades. Inequalities between urban and rural areas have also widened since the 2008 global financial crisis, with recovery much slower for rural economies. And in addition, the COVID-19 pandemic came as a shock that has really exacerbated existing challenges and created even further uncertainty. So the report showed that despite this overall difficult environment, rural regions offer many opportunities as we look into the future if the right strategies and policies are in place. For instance, as we elaborated recently in a COVID policy note on the implication of coronavirus for rural development, the acceleration of the use of digital tools is fomenting remote working practices, remote learnings, and e-services. This new trend provides new advantages to rural regions, which become more attractive places for workers and even in some cases for firms. For instance, in the pace to recovery, many governments can accelerate the deployment of e-health and e-learning services to increase the resilience of rural regions to external shocks. This shift can really help rural communities retain young people and provide attractive public services to new residents, while momentum towards a low carbon economy provides rural communities with opportunities through the development of renewable energy projects and creation of bio and circular economies. So the publication, Rural Wellbeing, Geography of Opportunities, offers a new vision for rural policies that focuses on raising the well-being of all rural dwellers and on leveraging opportunities in all rural places. The report identifies long-term responses to address the challenges brought by megatrends such as globalization, digitalization, demographic and climate change. This transformation, coupled with the long-lasting impact of the 2008 global financial crisis, are deeply shaping the economic landscape of rural regions. Indeed, our evidence from the work that we have been conducting in this area suggests that the benefits of these transformations have flowed disproportionately to metropolitan regions. For example, since the onset of the 2008 global financial crisis, GDP per capita in metropolitan region increased more than twice as much compared to rural regions. Likewise, the productivity gap between urban and rural places has also widened, and new job creations have flowed mainly to cities. So to address this issue, the report leverages improved data and analysis while broadening the scope from one that used to focuses on economic indicators to one that also addresses environmental and social dimensions. And as such, the new approach places the well-being of citizens at its core and recognizes the diversity of rural places thanks to a deeper understanding of their complex socioeconomic system and their connections to cities. The OECD principles of rural policy, which were adopted in May 2019 by ministers at the OECD Regional Development Ministerial Meeting, they represent a key tool to help advance this new vision for rural development. These principles that you can find easily on our website, they offer concrete guidance for governments on how to implement the new framework that is being described here in this report through effective rural policies at the right scale and in coordination with all relevant stakeholders. The subtitle of the report, Geography of Opportunities, reflects here the central idea, which is that the geography of this content can be overcome. While rural policies are not without their challenges, they are surely places of opportunity. And the report provides extensive guidance for governments to help them unlock those opportunities. It contains specific recommendations on how government can help rural region raise productivity, increase resilience, make the most of connectivity and digitalization, deliver sustainable public services and an attractive quality of life for young and old, as well as drive the transition to a low carbon economy. Across all these areas, we show how well-designed rural policy can really help take advantage of local assets. This requires, first and foremost, coordination across all levels of government, as well as among key stakeholders from public and private sectors and from civil society. To put it simply, this report offers a path to unlocking the geography of opportunities. So thank you all once again for being here with us today, and I look forward to our fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lamia, and thank you for this introduction, which puts us immediately on the important issues, I think, that we are discussing today. In particular, I mean, putting the well-being of all rural places, citizens, firms at the center of the agenda. And in fact, I think it makes a perfect transition with the intervention of Mr. Walker, the Minister of Agriculture of Chile, because in Chile, there is now a national rural development policy, which is also putting really the quality of life of rural citizens and rural enterprise at the center. And what I found also interesting is the fact that this is not an isolated policy, but a policy which is linked with many other policies. So, Minister, I know you are implementing this policy. This is a main part of your work. So I give you the floor now for your intervention. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Alan. I will share a presentation. Thanks, Kamal, for your presentation. With me are Maria Emilia Undurraga. She's the National Director of ODEPA, and also Jose Montero. Their team has been working in this Chilean Rural Development National Policy. I will try to do this presentation in English. So, and first of all, I would like to say to everyone, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We are far away as a country from the world. To all delegates present today and to the Secretariat, I would like to start this presentation giving thanks to the Secretariat for this invitation. The OECD have played a very important role in our rural development national policy process, and I am really proud to share with you today these results of several years working in these policies. So you will have this presentation. I will try to do it in 10 minutes. And first of all, tell you that there are three aspects concentrated in this policy. The balance of these three aspects are very important. So the social, the economic, and the environmental aspects are very important. We have been talking with many people around the country. This is a very long and thin country, you know that, but we have traveled to all the region to talk with the people, to try to understand their cultures, no? So we build this policy listening many regions and different rural sectors. So it has been very important to talk with the civil society, to public sector and private sector, no? The index of this presentation is Rurality in Chile, Building a National Policy, third, Rural Development National Policy, and OECD contribution that has been very, very important for us, no? Rurality in Chile, well, you know that Chile is a very long and thin country. We have a lot of different types of climate and different cultures. And so Chile is, in agriculture is very important. We are the second largest exporter in our country. We exported $18 billion, no? And that is very important for the labor in our country. 1 million people works in agriculture in this country, and we export our products to more than 150 countries around the world. So the 83% of the Chilean surface belongs to different rural communes, 263 rural communes from the 346 communes are rural communes. So the green color, you can see the rural communes, and the gray color are mixed communes, and the yellow color, we have the urban communes. Well, we have a rurality in Chile. We have two different criteria. One is our criteria is the INE. That means that in Chile we have 12% of rurality, but if we do the measurement with your criteria, OECD criteria, we have 25.5% of rural sectors. As you know, we have a very big gap between rurality and the urban sectors, no? Some of them you will have this presentation is, for example, that we have 1.3% of our rural households does not have continuous supply of electricity, but the big gap we have in water. So we have 54% of rural population have access to drinkable water. The 98% of the urban population have access in the big cities, no? So we have a big gap between different sectors, between the urban sector and rural sector. You will have this presentation, but and you can see in these two slides the gap that we have between rural and urban sectors. Well, rurality in Chile, a place of big opportunities for the country. So we have to afford the rurality, looking the opportunities. And we have a lot of opportunities. One of them is the decentralize the country. Promote rurality is also a promotion of the regional development, no? We have to redistribute more territorial equality in relation with urban sectors. Sustainability future, we have a big challenge there to value this diversity and promote a productive development in a context of water scarcity and climate change. Well, we have to see the rurality in a long-term aspect. We have a space for a collaborative work between the public sector to work for equalizing opportunities throughout the country. Well, we have been working very hard to build this policy. So we started on 2012, we anticipate the challenge. In 2014, we had the first version of these policies, and now in 2020, we have already our rural development national policies. So we have an official publication, we have our official document. Now, rural development national policy is our official policy. We have walked a lot distance to build this policy, but now it is a reality. We have this policy for our people in our government. Well, we have 54 guidelines to improve the quality of life and increase opportunities for the rural inhabitants of Chile. First is social welfare. Second one is economics opportunities. Third one is environmental sustainability. And the fourth one is culture and identity. So alone we cannot build this policy. Therefore, we create a committee of different ministers. We are 14 different ministries working in this policy. The Minister of Agriculture is the president of these 14 ministries. So we are working with them to build this policy. We have we have 14 ministries working in per each aspect to develop the policy. Has been a very good experience. We are the coordinator as a ministry of those 14 different ministries. Well, the key of OECD recommendations, I would like to say that one is review the definition of rural. The second one is adopt a modern rural development policy. The third one, make government a powerful force for the rural progress. We have to be involved, all of the government developing the policy. And four, adopt a new paradigm of rurality. No? Well, OECD Rural Policy Review Chile, Principles on Rural Policies and Rural Well-being, Geographic of Opportunities. And only say that the Chilean values recognize and promote its rurality as a distinctive, essential, and enduring quality of the nation, integrity, the rich diversity of rural territories into sustainable development, promoting greater opportunities and a better quality of life for its inhabitants. Well, that is a summary of our policy, and if you have questions or doubts, you can be in touch to discuss this policy. For us, has been really important, and we are very optimistic that in regions we have a lot of opportunities making a much better agriculture to give opportunities for the people who lives in our 16 different regions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much for this presentation. I think it's very encouraging to see also how you have been also making use of the OECD review and transforming it in the implementation of your policy. I noted also all the engagement you had with the various stakeholders, but I'm sure Enrique, when making the presentation, will come back on this discussion. So I think it was very important for us to understand that this is not only theory, what we are discussing, but this is really practice in terms of policies being implemented in various countries, and this can have a tremendous impact on people and citizens and firms. So thank you very much for this highlight. Now I think we have a nice video, 2 to 3 minutes to show you, which has been prepared by the rural team. So you can put this, I don't know who is, okay. So let's go. So now we will continue, and I think we will move to what may be the main dish of the day, and we will have a presentation by Enrique Garcilaso of the report itself. Enrique, as many of you know, is overlooking all the work of the Working Party on Rural Policy, and so Enrique, you have the floor.
Thank you, Alan. Sharing my screen. Can everybody see? Well, I seem to have my screen frozen.
Okay, maybe somebody else can share the screen. Okay, so maybe what I suggest in this case is you try to fix the issue, Enrique, and then we come back to you after our first speaker. Which at the end is not an issue because everything is interrelated. Of course, it would have been probably better to hear about the framework first, but we can do this later on. So in this case, Ufuk, if you are ready to speak. So I would like to introduce our first external speaker, academic Ufuk Achik. And Ufuk, you are a professor of economics at the University of Chicago, and I understand you are also involved in many research and work with the federal government in the United States. So Ufuk, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So let me share my screen first. I guess you are able to see it, right?
Perfect.
It goes, do you see the second slide now?
Perfect.
Very good, excellent. All right. So thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting panel. And obviously, you know, I enjoyed immensely the minister's talk. Both for Chicago, Chile means something special, and I think also for Chile, I think Chicago means something special. So that's why I think this goes both ways. So today I'll be talking about socioeconomic dynamics of innovation. The reason I'm going to talk about this issue specifically, or I think it's important, is because obviously we are willing to promote productivity and innovation in rural areas, But I think, while we're doing this, it would be useful to look at the data and try to see what have we learned so far from academic research on the social impact or socioeconomic dynamics of innovation. And that can help us also shed light on some of the issues related to rural area innovation and productivity. So the first question I want to pose is, why do we care about innovation? Of course, we know that innovation is something good, but let's try to look at the data and let's try to understand what we learn from the data about innovation. I'm going to give you a number of reasons why we like innovation and why we care about innovation. The first evidence is the following. What we have done is we digitized all the patent records in the United States since 1836, and we try to understand both the regional dynamics and also the economic outcomes related to innovation. Both what are the causes of innovation and what does innovation cause on regions. So the first answer I would like to give is that in the long run, when I say long run, really here I'm talking about 100 years, in the long run, productivity growth or economic growth is coming from innovation. So that's why the first fact at the regional level, the first fact is that innovation does cause economic growth in the long run. Of course, in the short run, many things can affect economic outcomes, but in the long run, it is the innovation that leads to economic growth. But then another useful part of innovation is that innovation is creative destruction in the end, and it creates turnover among entrepreneurs and firms. So it is associated with social mobility. What we have seen in the data, both historically and also using the modern data, we have seen that in regions where we observe a lot of innovation, we also observe a lot of social mobility. When I say social mobility, it means conditional on having low-skilled parents or low-skilled father, what's the likelihood that the child is going to be high-skilled? You could ask the same question in terms of the income percentiles. If the child has a parent that's coming from a low-income percentile, what's the likelihood that the child is going to be up in the higher income percentiles? And we see a very strong association between innovation and social mobility. So that's the second reason why we care about innovation. And the third fact is that indeed we have done some interesting study here. We looked at the relationship between innovation and well-being, and indeed we do observe a positive relationship between innovation and well-being, but this is a bit a mild relationship. Why? Because there is an interesting nuance that we need to pay attention to. And that issue is the following. So when we talk about creative destruction and innovation, by definition, it creates winners and losers. And this is also true both in urban areas and rural areas. So if a new entrepreneur comes up with a new technology, it will potentially kick out an entrepreneur that uses the old technology. So as a result, all these workers who used to work for the old incumbent will go into the unemployment pool. So as a result, in our analysis, when we looked at the relationship between innovation and well-being, the relationship was mild. But once you separate the unemployment effect of innovation and creative destruction and the economic growth effect of innovation, then you see that indeed it does create a huge positive effect on well-being through the economic growth margin, because the salaries are growing, the profits are growing, so people are earning higher income, but conditional on being on the winning side. Once you take into account the people who goes into the unemployment pool, then those unemployment aspect creates a negative effect on the well-being. So in balance, it has a mild positive effect. So this means that the policies should be designed in such a way that the return from innovation should be inclusive, meaning that it should also take into account the people who goes into the unemployment pool. Potentially, the retraining programs could be one way to attack the people who goes into the unemployment pool, for instance. So that's why I think when we are encouraging more entrepreneurship, we should not forget that this is going to create both winners and losers, and we have to also take into account people who are being left behind. So far I've talked about three margins. It causes economic growth, it causes social mobility, and it has a direct effect on well-being, conditional on taking into account the unemployment effect. The fourth effect that I'm going to talk about is the impact of innovation on inequality. But there's a very interesting result here, which I want to specifically emphasize. When we look at the relationship between innovation and the usual common measures of innovation, inequality, sorry, like the Gini coefficient, we don't see a much relationship. Innovation has a very, very strong relationship with the top income inequality, not with Gini, but with top income inequalities, the income that's being earned by the top income earners. So this is because innovation is, of course, related to monopoly rents most of the time. And over the past several decades, this explosion in innovation has been hand in hand with the also explosion in income inequality, especially top income inequality. So that's why this is also something that has to be taken into account if we really want this to be sustainable. So as a result, the tax policy or the redistributive policies should take into account the higher and higher income that goes into the top income earners as a result of this encouraged innovation. Now, so far, I've talked about the link between innovation and inequality, but let's talk about the relationship or the causal impact of inequality on innovation, okay? Because innovation and inequality is a two-way street. If so far what I've said is that innovation causes top income inequality, but let's go the reverse way. How does the innovation impact, how does inequality impact innovation? So for this, I want to step back for a second, and I don't want to focus on firms, but I want to talk about entrepreneurs and inventors. And the question I want to pose is, who becomes an inventor in the data? So this is very interesting. So first, when we look at the education groups on the x-axis and on the y-axis, within each education group, we look at the fraction of inventors, you see that there's a massive relationship between education and the likelihood of becoming an inventor. And this is true everywhere, both in rural areas and urban areas. This is true in the US, in Denmark, in Finland, in Turkey. No matter which country you look at, this relationship is extremely robust. So as a result, if we really want to talk about productivity and innovation in rural areas, we have to also talk about education, because education is related to becoming an entrepreneur and an inventor. But the second graph that I would like to show you here is the relationship between parental income and the child's likelihood of becoming an inventor. On the x-axis, I have the parental income percentiles. On the y-axis, again, I have the likelihood of the child being an inventor. What you see here is that for the bottom 95% of the population, there's no relationship between parental income and the child's likelihood of becoming an inventor. But among the richest 5%, it goes through the roof. So the link between parents' income and the child's likelihood of becoming an inventor or entrepreneur is extremely tightly related among the richest. So innovation is a rich man business, okay, when we look at the data. So this is something that has to be taken into account. So inequality, unless there's an equal access to education, for instance, can be problematic. And from these two figures, what we see is that education is important, parental resources are important. So it's very likely that in the data, we see that the childs coming from rich families have access to high quality education. And as a result, they're able to express their creativity. But again, it circles back into the education policy. And if we really want to talk about high quality innovation policy in rural areas, we have to discuss inequality and equal access to education in rural areas. So now we talked about who becomes an inventor and who produces these innovations. Let's talk about the return to innovation. How does the return to innovation being shared? So here I'm going to show you something quite interesting, and this is something that we've done in Finland. And what we've seen is quite interesting. Time zero here indicates that when there's a new innovation in a firm, time zero indicates the innovation of firm. Each separate lines are indicating the income of different groups. So here we have inventors, entrepreneurs, blue collar workers, and white collar workers. What we see is, let me simplify this graph. What we see in the data is that when there's an innovation, 45% of this return goes to entrepreneur. Entrepreneur is the one who puts the money into this new investment. And of course, 45% of the return goes to entrepreneur. Blue collar, so inventor indeed gets only 8% of the return. Blue collar workers are getting 26%, and white collars are getting 22%. So what does this mean? This means that we cannot only look at the inventors who are producing these new technologies or innovations, we have to also look at the people who are investing their money into this business. Indeed, entrepreneurs are probably the most sensitive to any incentive package that we are going to announce for these rural entrepreneurs, right? For instance, the tax policy or any type of subsidies, probably entrepreneurs will be the most sensitive one. And that's why when we are designing our tax policy, this is also something that we have to take into account. Another very interesting result that we've seen in the data is that whenever there's a new innovation in a company, we looked at the different groups within a firm, and we asked, how does income change for different groups after innovation? What we have seen is that indeed for junior people, so these are junior white collar and junior managers, the income goes up. But when we look at the senior managers or senior white collars, the income doesn't increase, and indeed it even goes down for some groups, especially for seniors. And the likelihood of them getting unemployed is also increasing upon innovation. So what happens? Why do seniors lose and juniors gain when there's a new technology or innovation? Well, we looked further in the data, and of course, when somebody ages, two things age. One, the biological age obviously increases, but also the time since the last diploma or the education is also aging for old people. When you split the two, we see that biological age, once you take into account the age of the education, biological age has a positive impact on return to innovation. Indeed, it's the age of the education or age of the diploma that has a negative impact. Again, we come back to the education policy. So when people are getting, when people are aging, of course, they are getting away from the technology frontier. So we need to retrain these people. So we need to retrain the people who are joining the unemployment pool so that they can get closer to the frontier and they can contribute to productivity growth. So I'm running out of time, but the final thing.
Ufuk, one more minute.
One more minute, absolutely. So I would like to mention one more issue, which is that producing new technologies is not sufficient. We have to also talk about how we can diffuse these technologies in rural areas. So when we look at the data, for instance, in the US, 20% of the patents are being sold in the secondary market. So technologies are changing hand very, very rapidly. So this is also something that we have to take into account in rural areas. When there's a new technology, the producer of those technologies are not necessarily the best users of those technologies. So we need to really encourage sharing the technologies. This could be maybe either through the secondary market for technologies, or maybe this could be through licensing of new technologies. And the final issue I would like to mention is that, for instance, venture capital is a big business in the US, not because it provides funding, but because venture capitalists are providing adult advice to new entrepreneurs. And I think this is also something that has to be taken into account. So Bill Gates, when he was talking about its first venture capital investment they received, he talked about the most important thing we needed was an adult advice when we started our company. So that's why I think in rural areas, educating or giving advice to entrepreneurs is an important deal. So these are just the policy takeaways from my presentation. Innovation is good for growth, social mobility, and happiness, yet the inequality consequences should also be taken into account. Education policy is key for innovation and becoming an inventor. And this is also important to make the growth process inclusive. So the retraining programs, for instance, is an important deal. And we need to think about the tax policy carefully when we are talking about, who is going to get affected, right? Especially the financiers and the managers will be affected by this. So that's why, the tax policy should be designed carefully. And then finally, advising the entrepreneurs is a big deal. Even in the US or in developed countries, even the top entrepreneurs are being advised by VCs in rural areas. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ufuk, for this presentation. And thank you very much for putting innovation at the center of this discussion. As you may know, or some of you know, we have a major ongoing project on enhancing rural innovation also, which is looking at a wide range of issues, including some of this. So I think this discussion is very useful, not only in the context of a publication, And here we are also raising this issue, but also in the context of the future work that we have with the OECD. So Enrique, if you are ready, if the presentation works, you have the floor. Enrique?
Yes, can you hear now?
Yes.
Excellent. So it looks like the coronavirus got inside my computer here in Paris, but I think we will proceed. Just to give you a short insight of what this publication is in a length of 10 minutes is trying to stretch it up. And I'll try to summarize a couple of the main takeaways of the presentation. So I think that the first takeaway is really that rural places or rural regions are not as traditionally thought, that it's just a leftover of urban. And these are places that that have a sense of a different continuum. As you go from the urban to the rural, you go from the large city to the peri-urban area, to towns, to villages, to the rural. So what we've been trying to do a lot with this work is to come up with this diversity of rural places. And in broad terms, we think there are three types of rural places. One that are inside the functional urban areas, the other ones that are outside but in proximity. And the third is the remote places. And the way that we do it is because we think that the challenges are different, and the policy responses should also be able to differentiate a little bit the challenges and the opportunities. So the report highlights a little bit what we think are the challenges and the opportunities of these types of rural places. The next takeaway is that according to our newest typology, we have about 30% of people within the OECD living in rural regions, but the majority of these have a close connection with cities and with large metropolitan areas, and only about 8% of the total population is far away in these remote categories. And what we see is that what I mentioned before, this concept of continuum, that rural has many different shades. So it's important to think about rural policies with urban policies and how to better link these two constituencies together. It's no longer that rural can operate kind of like independently and pretends they don't have any sort of interaction with cities, but it's important that we work on these linkages and find these complementarities. The third takeaway is that the report finds is these demographic challenges that rural places face. If we look at the share of population increasing in metro and in non-metro, we find that in all OECD countries, the share of population living in metro has increased over the last 2 decades. Only in Greece, it has decreased. And in fact, in many countries, about 40%, the share of population in remote places has been shrinking, and in about 30% of countries with medium and small regions have also been shrinking. So you do have this population decline or shrinking in a lot of these remote places. How to deal with this is quite a challenge. And not only that, but it's also aging tends to be stronger in some of these rural places. The elderly dependency ratios tend to be much higher. The fourth part that we find is that the effects of the global financial crisis have reversed a little bit the trends that we saw before. It has had an effect on rural regions more so than in large cities. And what is interesting is that before the crisis, we saw that the growth was higher in some of these remote places. There was a process of convergence. And after the crisis, both the remote category and the regions with medium and small cities have had hit the hardest. Against metro regions, or those that are close to the bigger cities, they seem to be more resilient to the effects of these shocks. So what we try to do in this report is to come up with a little bit the context that are shaping the performance of rural regions. And we make reference to some of these megatrends that I talked about before, like demographic challenges, globalization, and also the shocks that we have seen, but also the gradual emergence of competition of emerging economies, and the fact that some of these rural regions are more dependent on tradable activities. how to deal with the environment and the climate change technology, and what to make out of digitalization. So these mega trends are shaping a little bit the context of rural regions. And we think that these mega trends are also important areas of opportunity where policy needs to be looking at. So the framework that is inside this publication is actually a multi-dimensional approach, but it places the people at the center. It tries to focus on the well-being of individuals. And in order to do this, we have expanded the objectives beyond just the economic, and also put the social and the environmental objective up front. We also make a reference that there's a need to differentiate rural places within the three categories that I mentioned before. There's also a need to work better with the public, the private, and the civil society. And also there's also a great need to work together with the urban stakeholders and try to take advantage of these high degree of interlinkages and interdependencies that we have. So the report gives a number of recommendations on all the three aspects. I'm not going to go into depth, but in terms of the economy, we try to focus on areas that we can take into account some of these global value chains, how to add more value in some of these activity, trying to look at financing for rural SMEs, work with the notion of smart specialization, and also promote innovation that we heard before. On the social side, in order to address some of the demographic challenges, we stress out there's a need to come up with long-term strategies that can deliver services to the actual scenarios that we're going to be facing in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, how to make use of new sources to deliver public goods, making use of digitalization and technologies. And on the environment, we identify a number of opportunities that are out there. And we have observed how some of these rural regions can play a bigger role in the transition to a low carbon economy, from transportation policies, from ecosystem services to developing renewable energy opportunities. So the publication is quite rich on identifying a number of recommendations in each of these three areas. Coming back to the principles, we developed these principles, and we really see both the principles and the new framework for rural development go hand in hand. The framework is a tool that gives us new vision for rural development, but I think it's important to stress out that we also want countries to advance on the implementation of this new vision. And for that, we have 11 OECD principles on rural policy. We have created a website with some country notes that we will be monitoring how countries are moving in the implementation of these principles. In the case of Chile, is quite interesting, as they are not only have developed this new policy, but they're also quite interested on advancing on implementing the OECD principles on rural policy. So we hope this can be an interesting tool for governments to advance on the reform process. In terms of looking forward, we did a policy note on the coronavirus that focused a little bit at the rural vulnerabilities. We looked at 4 policy areas, from medical responses and improving health, to strengthening basic services in rural places, to supporting firms, and also improving the digital infrastructure and accessibility. And I think what's interesting from this note is that, yes, all places are facing a lot of challenges in these areas, and a lot of the short-term responses are trying to alleviate some of these impacts. But we also identified some key areas of opportunities from this greater degree of teleworking, the greater awareness to deliver services in new forms, the momentum to accelerate a just transition. So this note is quite interesting, and also trying to come up with identifying the opportunities that are out there for some of these rural regions. So I think just in sum, this framework that we call Rural Wellbeing Geography of Opportunities is one that places, it's a people-centered approach to rural development, focuses on well-being. It is multi-sectorial, so the coordination across different ministries is quite key, and how this coordination trickles down across levels of government is also quite important, including the civil society. We talk a lot about integrating policies, and we talk a lot about differentiating policies to different types of rural regions that we have identified. So that's in sum, in a 10-minute presentation, if I were to give from this publication. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Enrique. At that point in time, I would like to say that, of course, there is a publication which is available on the iLibrary of the OECD. We also produce some highlights of a document, which is a summary document of about 20 pages that we also intend to translate into other languages. So if some of your countries are also interested to translate the highlight, I think we can really facilitate this. This will enable a wider range of readers to access, of countries to access to the document, but also shortly after the end of the meeting, we will make all the presentation, the video, the highlights, etc., available to all participants. And so just to keep, for you to keep this in mind. So let's move now to our next speaker, Alessandra Faggian. I'm not sure if I, so you are professor of economics in the Gran Sasso Science Institute in L'Aquila in Italy. So Alessandra, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. While I'm actually sharing the screen, see if I can multitask and actually tell you a little bit about who I am. As Alain said, I am a professor of regional economics. I spent 17 years abroad between the UK and the US, and then in 2016, I came back to Italy. And since then, I've been working with the National Strategy for Inner Areas here in Italy, which is very similar, it looks like, the National Rural Development Plan in Chile. So it was incredibly interesting for me to listen to the Minister of Chile to actually talk about what they're doing. And the period where they started is also very similar to when the national strategy here in Italy started as well. And we are the only group in Italy that has a formal memorandum of understanding with these national strategy. So we've been working with them really closely for the last 4 years. Right, so I'm very well aware of the time. So if you see me looking down on the right, it's because I have my timer there. So I can actually be perfectly on time in 15 minutes. I think that in the last few months, because of my background, when I got to interact with the media, one of the questions that they were asking me the most was, are actually people gonna move to rural areas? And what are the opportunities that now the rural areas have because of COVID? Distancing is becoming the new mantra, as Rune Fischer said in one of his articles in 2020. And if we compare this crisis to the previous one, this crisis was different because it kind of questioned our ways of doing things. We always assumed that density, connectedness of urban areas was actually very important, and then these repeated face-to-face contacts somehow were superior, a superior way of sharing new knowledge and hard to codify ideas. But the COVID-19 has actually challenged this logic. Now, it's not that before COVID-19, there weren't people that were saying that we needed place-sensitive policies for rural areas. In fact, you are all examples of this. We are all examples of this. We have been studying rural areas for a very long time, and we all were saying that some place-sensitive policies were needed. But now the real question is this, actually. It's COVID-19 actually helping or hampering the peripheries? Now, to show my bias here, what I did, it's I actually Googled COVID-19 and peripheral areas in both English and Italian. Now, normally, if you do that on Google and you use English, you get a lot more entries than if you do it in Italian. But it became such a big deal here in Italy that if you try and do it, you'll find that if you Google COVID and inner areas in Italian, you'll find a lot more entries than if you do it in English. And this shows, first of all, my bias, because I'm Italian, so I'm bombarded every day from this question about what's going to happen with the inner areas and COVID now, but also my interest. I do believe that there are opportunities now that are opening up for the inner areas, but I also believe that there are a lot of people that are using these to say, what's going to happen to city? Wait, cities now are in trouble. We have to help cities. And I'm a little bit worried that if we oversimplify the problem, then we go back to take care more of the cities, thinking that now, because of COVID, the inner areas have, in fact, more opportunities that they do actually have. I agree with Lamia that there is an unlocked potential, there are opportunities for inner areas, but I also agree with her when she said, if the right strategies are in place. That's what she said, and actually wrote it down, because this is what I want to highlight. If we keep on doing the right thing, then it's gonna turn into something really good. So the two phases of COVID. I read a lot of articles in the last few months, not just academic articles, but also newspaper cuts and stuff like that. And it seems to me that there are so much out there, and you have kind of centrifugal forces, so opportunities for peripheries that have been highlighted, but you also have centripetal forces that are actually probably favoring the cities more. So some of the arguments that have been advanced, of course, density and agglomeration favor the spread of contagion, so people are now worried about that. There was also a link that has been found with pollution, so this environmental question. For the housing market, well, if people need to be in a lockdown like it happened in Italy for quite a long time, then, you know, I wish I had a garden, obviously. So the people are gonna favor more space, maybe larger houses. They are also, of course, valuing amenities more. I live in the mountains and I was very lucky to do so because I could go out. Living in the town might not be as nice. There was also a lot of debate on this proximity tourism in less crowded places, and I'll go back to that in a few slides. And then, of course, all the huge debate on the working from home phenomenon that might favor, in fact, peripheries. But there are also centripetal forces. I will show a map again in a few slides about the digital divide. And in fact, if I have to go back to what Ufuk said about education, innovation, I've done a lot of work on human capital. I always say, if I could invest in just one thing, just one, I would pick always human capital education first. The problem here is that not only peripheral places have a digital divide, but they also have a digital human capital divide, in the sense that even if there are the infrastructure, normally the people have more troubles actually using the infrastructure that there are because they are older. And then, of course, this problem of essential services. You talked about rural well-being, rightly so, and not rural growth or income or wealth, because this was also the rationale of the inner area strategy. What we are trying to do here is improve the rural well-being of people, and to do so we have to pay a lot of attention to essential services, so to health, education, transportation. This is really key, really important. Of course, when there is a crisis, normally weaker economic systems are more likely to suffer from the economic downturn. So this is also something that we have to take into account, because if the small businesses are failing more in the peripheral areas, this is going to create a huge problem. And of course, the working from home has another side to it, which is that actually cities might become even more appealing, because if you work from home and you only have to go in once a week, if there is an effect on traffic, maybe, you know, so there is less traffic in a very crowded city, or if you start using alternative means of transportation like cycleways or something that it's a little bit less intrusive than cars, then who knows, maybe even cities might become more appealing. But because I am an economist, and above all, I'm somebody that needs to kind of find some kind of order in all these issues, I actually try to classify all these issues that I've highlighted before into some kind of dimensions to make some mental order. And so it seems to me that as an economist, you have to classify all these issues in demand and supply issue, and then short-term versus long-term issue. So it's absolutely true that in the short term, as far as the individual behavior is concerned, we have windows of opportunities. The working from home, the proximity tourism, it's all good for peripheral areas. And again, if we do the right thing, we can catch these short-term demand. In the, on the supply side, in the short term, well, I'm sure you do the same. Here in Italy, we only talk about recovery funds and the money that is coming from Europe, because it really becomes important to allow the survival of the small businesses everywhere. And in the short term, because of a crisis in the liquidity, the only thing you can actually do it is just with subsidies. And this is true both for small firms and other firms, big ones also, both in peripheral areas and in the cities. So this is a problem that actually I don't see it as peculiar just to the more peripheral places, even though it might be more poignant there. But we don't have to forget that there are some long-term supply side problems which are structural to the peripheries. Again, I think that Lamia talked about the population aging, the industrialization of these peripheral places. These are the so-called slow burn processes that these peripheries have experienced in the last decades for a long time. So it's not just about the shock of the COVID. We have to remember that we have to do something, keep on going, doing something to fill this gap, this structural gap in the peripheries. And then I think that I put it in red because actually this is what I think it's the biggest unknown. What's going to happen in the demand, so in the individual behavior over the long term? I mean, are all these changes in preferences that we are seeing now, are they here to stay or are they going away? So let's talk about a little bit of the window of opportunities, the short-term demand. This is actually the easiest one, I think, to tackle. And in a sense, I think that past the summer, at least in Italy, this window of opportunity might already be gone, because what happened in Italy in the short term after the first wave was that, first of all, the internal tourism picked up. So 93% of Italians decided to stay in Italy for their holidays, and 25th near home, so within their region. What happened was that after the lockdown, there was a real surge in less obvious Italian tourism destinations. So I actually live near the mountain that you see on top, and I've never seen the Gran Sasso mountain as crowded as I've seen it over the summer, because it was all about social distancing. So everybody had the same idea. Everybody went to the mountains, right? Searching for something that they didn't know. Abruzzo is not a very touristic region. Well, it was something that most of Italians didn't know. So, I mean, I don't have the graph here, but I can show you that I'm from Lombardy, from near Milan. Half of Lombardy came to Abruzzo over the summer. As far as the survival of businesses, which is a supply short-term problem, I think that we really need to consider this as a big problem. In fact, in July, Istat estimated that about 38%, almost 39% of Italian businesses were at risk of failing. And not all the businesses, of course, have the same risk, because the smaller you are, the higher is this risk. So this is really important for rural areas, because if there are micro businesses there, small businesses, which are more likely to be located in the peripheries, their failure, their at risk of failure is actually quite high. In fact, even above 40%.
Sandra, you have 3 more minutes.
Yeah, 4, it says my clock.
Yeah, no.
11 minutes.
Very good clock.
Yes, it's the iPhone. But this is what I want to say, is that actually there are structural problems in the peripheries. And so here I'm just showing the digital divide. So in the first map, you see the darker is the area, the more important is this digital divide, people that don't have access to the internet, or at least not to a fast internet. In the second one, I only highlighted the inner areas in Italy, and you can see that basically all the dark is in there. But here is probably the most important of all. This is the map that comes from the National Strategy of Inner Areas. So the red and orange areas are the central one, where you find essential services. The green one are the ones that are away from these essential services. So remote areas, it takes about 40 minutes to reach an exhaustive range of secondary school, a first level DEA hospital, so a hospital that has things like transfusion or emergency care, and a kind of railway station which is big enough to go everywhere. For ultra remote areas, it's 75 minutes. right? So this is still the case right now. And in fact, what the inner area national strategy is trying to do, it's improve these essential services before actually working on a long-term strategy. And we do need to keep on working seriously on these place-sensitive policies to make this place appealing, not just for the short break, but for living. And then finally, you know, how much of the current status is here to stay? Well, this goes into, first of all, knowing how a behavior change forms and a habit forms, but also there has been an unveiling of new opportunities. So an economist would say an expanding of our choice set. As for the first, I thought that actually psychologists could figure out pretty easily how long it took to actually change our behavior and our habits. It turns out that research on habit formation is still in its infancy. So it's not clear how long it takes for us to get used to something new. And so we had changing in consumption. Of course, the initial spending pattern were not universal and they were very erratic. So in the US, toilet paper went up 734%. In Italy, we were all making bread. These are not something that are there to stay in the long term, but I think that there are some consumption patterns that are there to stay for the longer period. Like for instance, this idea of it has been called the health and care economy. Cleanliness and hygiene now are very high up in our mind, in our agenda. Postponing of non-essential purchases, the online shopping, for instance, and also the idea that we were cocooning, and so wellness and entertainment might now be in trouble because we have some kind of at-home solutions for these sectors. I have 1 minute. So changing in housing and preferences, very quickly, I'm gonna show you that of course people are gonna look more for personal outdoor space and private workspace because they work at home, but also of course the broadband speed. And in terms of expanding the choice set, the working from home actually seems to be there to stay for a long time. If you look at the red here, pre-COVID, only 42% of people were working from home. In the next 2 years, only 3% expect not to do so. Everybody thinks that in some kind of percentage I will be working from home. And the same for attending universities online. So these are the biggest, some of the biggest university town in Italy. And as you can see, the availability of rental accommodation went up tremendously compared to last year, because now, you know, all the people that are in the South are studying online from the South and not going to Milan anymore. Okay, so this is my last conclusion. I don't call them conclusion, but what's the take-home message? First of all, this is something really unprecedented. So when people are using the 2009 crisis to forecast the post-COVID world, I'm very skeptical. I don't think we're going back to normal because even if we go through this COVID crisis pretty quickly, the epidemics are kind of becoming more frequent. So people are adjusting their expectations, and adjusting their expectation means that some of these new habits might actually stay there for a long time. There is still a lot of uncertainty. So when we are talking about things like this, you know, the uncertainty is massive. I actually believe that if you compare the centripetal and centrifugal forces that I kind of talked to you about before, city will not die. And this is very important because I think that we don't have to shift the attention too much on cities, but rather keep on focusing on place-sensitive policies that allow the periphery to grab the opportunities that in fact are actually coming out in this period of the COVID-19. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. I'm sorry for the pressure, but we have a limited time with all of us. So we are a bit late. However, I checked with the team. I think we can close at 3:30, so we have about 15 minutes. I want to give enough time also to the chair of the working party to make some final remarks. Minister, are you still there? I have one question for you if you are around. Chile, are you there? No? Okay, the minister has to leave. Okay, thanks. So in this case, maybe I will take one question I have around innovation, and then I think we'll move directly to Peter and the chair for some final remarks. So I guess, Ufuk, this question is more or less for you. It's a question is about, do you have any evidence of the differences in types of innovation between rural and urban regions?
And normally, so I try to answer these questions also in writing in the chat window, but typically when we look at the data, we see that the major innovations are coming from big cities. And typically we see that the type of innovation that are coming from rural areas are, of course, more incremental on the flip side. This could be due to the fact that in urban areas, the investment is much bigger, the projects undertaken are much bigger projects, and also the synergies that are being created in big cities. We know that proximity is important. People should be close to each other when they are thinking about new technologies. So we know that social interaction is extremely important. We have done some work on this. And the social interaction is maximized in bigger cities. So that's why this could be the reason why we see these bigger innovations in urban cities. Having said that, of course, things are also region specific. Like for instance, if one field, if certain sectors are more dominant in a region, we observe that the technologies or innovations are geared more towards those sectors. But typically, in urban versus rural, we see this quality of innovations being very different.
Thank you very much. Maybe one question for you, Alessandra. One question is, can you define clearer what inner area is in Italy?
Yes.
This is one question.
Yes, of course. So it's very complex, but just very quickly, it's based on commuting time from what they call the essential services centers that provide essential services. And the essential services are a good range of secondary schools, hospitals that have some kind of services such as a center for transfusions or emergency repair, intensive care, and so on, and train stations that have at least a certain number of platforms. So then basically you measure how long it takes from this peripheral area to drive there, and you get a classification of the inner areas in 3 different categories: intermediate, rural, and ultra peripheral.
Okay, thank you very much. What we can do, however, even also on this project, we can share with the participant a few documents that also explain what this project is about. I'm aware, of course, that we had a number of other questions on the question and answer chat, but unfortunately we cannot take all of them. What the Secretariat will do is that we will take the question and also share with the panelists, and then you can, provide us with some sort of a response, to this question. We didn't want to give you more homework, but and then we will share with the whole group. So again, thank you very much to all of you for this intervention. At that point in time, I also would like to warmly thank all the OECD team, which has been working for some years, on this publication. In particular, we have Anna Moreno, Lisanne, Andres, Gareth, Michel, also Fernando, also of course Enrique, Salia, and also many other colleagues who have been providing inputs and contribution, and also many OECD member countries which have been directly contributing to some of the practices which are in the publication. So thank you to all the team and to all the colleagues for this important contribution. With this, I will pass the floor to Peter Vosner, who is head of the Smart Specialization Unit responsible for policy coordination of innovation within the Slovenian government. And Peter, you have been also for some years the chair of the Working Party on Rural Policy, but you are also a member of the Regional Development Policy Committee. So you are, in other words, working very closely with the OECD and with all the members. So Peter, you have the floor, and thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you, Elan. Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking the Secretariat in the name of the Working Party I've been chairing it for the last 5 years, but actually the report builds on 14 years because it has been 14 years since the then called new, now old rural policy paradigm put forward by the OECD. And since then, we felt together with the Secretariat there's so much new evidence, so much new approaches, and even definitions of what rural is about came up, that we thought we need a flagship publication, which we are launching today. I have to also say that perhaps one of the things that we really wanted to do was to bring down the stereotype. Listening to the chairs of rural policy working party back in the 20, 30 years back, it seems that nothing really has changed. We have remained in the world where rural has and is still being perceived as backward and lagging. And we thought that the evidence now actually is a much more complex, much more nuanced on the one hand, but at the same time, and that's something that Lamia pointed her finger to in the beginning, was that we have this geography of discontent with really drastic and really damaging also political consequences. Now, one of the messages on the positive side, of course, is that those that kind of discontent or geography of discontent can be overcome, but at the same time, it will not happen on its own. What I would add there is actually that, and that's a message that comes out from this report, is that actually it seems that we haven't learned much, because the trends, it's not just that the negative trends are in terms of increased disparities, that they continue. It's actually they're getting stronger after the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. And I think that's a really loud message that the policymakers should take on board, that what we have been doing as societies, as regions, as nations, is simply not enough. Now, let me go to just a couple of some of the linkages to what the great discussants were talking about. I think on the positive side, I think there are a number of really positive examples. So I think we really try to go away from the averages, away from this this classical view of rural just being agriculture, etc. But actually, identifying successful cases where we are seeing successful manufacturing firms prospering, where we are seeing, Ufuk was referring to the concentration of patents in the cities. But for example, there is evidence that shows how much design innovation is actually dispersed, and we are seeing pockets of specialized service providers that are actually very are specialized and are able to bring high value added. So we try to go from this linear logic of services are good, something is good, and trying to go to a much more nuanced approach. And I should also add there that a lot of work there remains to be done. I think one of the messages is that the only way to succeed is to embrace change, but that change will increase in speed further still. So Alain before mentioned already the innovation project that we have now engaged in this year, which is looking exactly into this. This is not just to do with COVID, which now took over all the attention, but it has to do with the technologies the transformations that would be there anyway. Of course, COVID will strengthen these transformations. It will dramatically speed them up. And I think Alessandra nicely pointed out that how these two trends will clash with the structural challenges that rural areas are facing. And that's the negative side of the equation. Those structural challenges and vulnerabilities, perhaps, that I should add, are there will remain. And it's the smart policy move that is being promoted by this publication, but also the rural policy principles that we would like to invite policymakers to take a closer look. Now, I think Ufuk's presentation nicely showed how multidimensional thinking is required, and how and actually the story continues, because that kind of multidimensional thinking that has to do with skills development, education, tax policy, industrial policy, innovation policy, they all need to function and need to be designed for different kinds of places. Now, I've been a policymaker for 20 years, and I know how hard and how complex it is. And I think it will require every effort to translate the recommendations from the principles and from the rural well-being publication put forward today into practice. However, I would argue there is no viable alternatives. I would join in with Enrique, who said that this publication should serve as a vision, as a tool, how to transition from a win-lose situation that seemed to characterize again another decade of development to a vision, to a development trajectory where we would have a win-win situation. And one of the messages from the publication actually is that rural areas should embrace urban, which is again something which was not so obvious until now. So my final thought would be, things will not happen on its own. Time to act is now. We are seeing continuation of negative trends, but there are a number of positive changes around there. We have seen that it's possible to succeed. And with intentional and smart approach promoted by the OECD's package, I would say, of recommendations, both in the rural well-being geography of opportunities publication as well as rural principles, I think we are much likelier to get to those to that positive vision. So allow me again to thank to the Secretariat, to all the speakers, and wish us all a successful transition and translation of the recommendations to practice. Good luck and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Peter. Bye-bye to all of you. Thank you very much, all speakers, for contribution.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Have a good day.